what is it that has made the human species so successful? Most people claim big brains or opposable thumbs. They are critical, but they aren't the spark. They are necessary for the spark, but they're not the spark itself. Life on Earth has always been about gene evolution. This was key for you seeing me on your screen right now, but the screen's technology, well, that's a different story. It's about the evolution of ideas. So how do ideas evolve? Take isolated groups like aborigines. They've progressed much slower than others. Why? They aren't biologically inferior. They have the same brains and thumbs. So what's missing? That's what I hope to explain in this video. In this video, you will learn about human progress. We'll see how our species outpaces others, even those with similar brain sizes. Only humans seek goods and services. We build complex supply chains for exotic fruits and intricate machines. We engage in buying and selling. We buy what we can't make or don't want to make. This includes goods and services that require special knowledge. Sellers, on the other hand, offer these products and services. They use systems developed over thousands of years, constantly innovating and improving. Now, time to get down to business. What the heck do you make of this? There is something we are all guilty of, an indulgence that we all allow ourselves to be fooled by. What is it? Think of it this way. Imagine, if you will, a family in 1800. Father is reading the New Testament. Sister is feeding her newborn brother. Mother is tending to dinner. The older son is quenching his thirst with fresh water from the brook. Oh please! This family is among the better off in the village, but a bronchitic cough interrupts father's scripture reading. It presages the pneumonia that will kill him at 53. The wood smoke from the fire doesn't help. He is actually lucky. The life expectancy, even in England, was less than 40 in 1800. The baby will die of the smallpox that is now causing him to cry. His sister will soon be the chattel of a drunken husband. The water the son is pouring tastes of the cows that drink from the brook. Toothache tortures the mother. The neighbour's lodger is getting the other girl pregnant in the hayshed. Her child will be sent to an orphanage. The stew is grey and gristly, yet meat is a rare change from gruel. There is no fruit or salad at this season. It is eaten with a wooden spoon from a wooden bowl. Candles cost too much, so firelight is all there is to see by. Nobody in the family has ever seen a play, painted a picture, or heard a piano. School is a few years of dull Latin taught by a bigoted martinet at the village. Father visited the city once. The trip cost him a week's wages. The others have never travelled more than 15 miles from home. Each daughter owns 2 wool dresses, 2 linen shirts and 1 pair of shoes. Father's jacket cost him a month's wages, but is now infested with lice. The children sleep 2 to a bed on a straw mattress on the floor, and as for the bird outside the window, tomorrow it'll be trapped and eaten by the boy. What is it we're all guilty of then? Well, is it not indisputably true that life is infinitely better now for most than it has ever been? We are all guilty of believing the past is somehow more idyllic than the present. In the last century, the push for cheaper, mass-produced goods has greatly improved living standards. For example, in ancient Babylon, 15 minutes of artificial light required 50 hours of work. Now it costs less than half a second of work. These advancements allow people to better their own lives and help others. This makes past human suffering seem distant, almost like a story. Speaking of stories, King Louis XIV, the wealthiest man in France and possibly the world at the time, had 498 servants preparing each meal. Yet, despite this extravagance, his meal would be far inferior to what you could make or order today. Today, you have no limits on your ingredients, location, or quantity. Your kitchen has no limits on complexity, and you have no cost limits on abundance. Of course, you may have a budget constraint. However, you always have instant access to all ingredients. Dividing work into many small tasks adds complexity and spreads risk. It protects against both shortages and limits. In 2009, an artist named Thomas Thwaites set out to make his own toaster, of the sort he could buy from a shop for about £4. He needed just a few materials: iron, copper, nickel, plastic and mica, which wraps around the heating elements. However, obtaining them was tough. He could likely mine for iron ore, but he needed a hot furnace, and that required electric bellows. He cheated and used a microwave oven. Plastic is made from oil, which he could not easily drill for himself, let alone refine. More to the point, the project took months, cost a lot of money, and resulted in an inferior product. Yet to buy a £4 toaster would cost him, today, less than an hour's work at the minimum wage. Bizarrely, this whole endeavour showed Thwaites how much he desperately relied on others, when in reality it highlighted the benefits of specialisation and trade. Many people, not aiming to help him, made it possible for him to buy a toaster cheaply.
So there's a picture of my toaster. That's it without the case on, and there it is on the shelves. Thanks.
The story of humanity, I argue, is about how specialists' knowledge lets us enjoy more by doing less. Innovation drives this. It boosts the division of labour and time. Let's set aside wars, religions and famines. The key theme is the rise of trade and specialisation, which sparks invention and creates time. I, the rational optimist, asks us all to view humanity differently. Despite setbacks, we've progressed for 100,000 years. Is this journey over, or does it have more to give? Could it speed up? Prosperity linked to trade and specialisation suggests a rise in labour. So when did this start, and why is it unique to humans? Some scientists argue that climate change or language sparked human growth. However, both claims fall short. Climate change affected all species simultaneously, yet only humans evolved. Evidence of language predates our species. I believe trade is the key. This includes buying, selling, bartering and exchanging. It's different from simple reciprocity, which has existed for ages. Many species engage in mutual grooming. Trade involves exchanging goods, fostering specialization. This, in turn, leads to more trade. For example, if one group excels at fishing and another at mining iron, a perfect trade scenario arises. It doesn't have to be equal. The miners might pay too much for fish, but that's besides the point. The goal is to get more from each other by increasing what they have to offer. What happens when trade and innovation stop? It's not good. Take Tasmania 4,000 years ago. It got cut off from the mainland. This isolation limited the hunter-gatherers. Only a few thousand people in about 9 tribes survived. Then something odd happened. They started losing technology. They went back to simple tools. Innovations became lazy. For example, they made rafts that couldn't be rowed. Women had to push them while swimming. Gradually, Tasmanian technology faded. The first to go were the hardest tools and skills. Without experts, mastering these became impossible. The small production couldn't support specialists. The lesson here is crucial. Self-sufficiency ended thousands of years ago. Basic lifestyles need a broad exchange of ideas and skills. This is vital. Human stability and innovation rely on numbers and connections. Small groups with few connections will decline and possibly die. Australia might have faced this issue. It was colonised about 45,000 years ago by small groups. They travelled lightly. Over time, their technology lagged behind the rest of the world. They lacked elastic weapons like bows and catapults, and ovens were unknown. Low population densities stifled their innovation. In contrast, large connected populations invent faster. Examples include Hong Kong and Manhattan. The idea that growth limits returns is a myth. Increased productivity with growth is a proven fact. Okay, great. So population density is wonderful. But what about all the crime and murder that comes with that? Isn't it a fact that the more people there are living together, the higher the rate of crime? Let us find out. It is innately human when engaging in trade to put our differences aside. Commerce is the activity of higher order when it comes to exchanging goods for goods or goods for money. We punish the other side of an exchange if they are too greedy with their request. We can all picture our feelings if someone tries to cheat us or our grandma. Trading then goes beyond religion, gender or race. It brings us together, setting aside differences for commerce. Here, one party aims to gain by giving. Suppose you live in medieval England. What might you be exposed to? Death? Certainly. Torture? Sadly. The medieval world was torrid. Commerce is the single most important component of modern living. What does that mean? Is it a coincidence that, as capitalist markets sharpened, living standards improved? Consider what a fair and open market actually achieves. In order for a market to thrive long term, there needs to be a high level of trust between buyers and sellers. Trust, by definition, requires fair play. Of course, some will get ripped off, but a free market allows for reputational damage and gain where things go well. eBay is a fantastic case in point in the modern era. Based on customer feedback, every seller aims to boost sales. They want to do this not by lowering prices, but by building trust. If you don't believe me, suppose you are looking at buying a laptop on eBay. You have the choice of two. One seller that claims to be the cheapest. You've researched enough to know this is true, but feedback from previous customers is full of complaints. Now, compare that to a seller who is more expensive but has a bulletproof rating. Their page is filled with excellent reviews and great feedback. Which one do you choose? Why gamble? There's no question. You pay more because trust itself is more valuable. The importance of this cannot be understated. In the past 2 centuries, since the Industrial Revolution, living standards rose. We now see a growing awareness. The abolition of the slave trade proves this. It reduced violence and murder rates. It also led to equal voting rights, the civil rights movement, and anti-child labour laws. It ensured education for all. By trading with each other, we trust each other. By trusting each other, we can see the world in a different light. A more enriched, civilized world makes it easier to stop oppression. Remember, biologically and genetically, we are no different to our barbaric medieval ancestors. We now interact with each other with compassion, not barbaric force. Of course, it's not commerce alone that is responsible for this. There need to be solid rules and laws in the market theatre. Studies show a direct link between a nation's wealth and its quality of education, its openness of markets, its citizens' freedoms to participate, and strong, corruption-free institutions. What exactly is the difference between North and South Korea? It's one word: governance. But what about the threat of overpopulation killing us all? We don't have the capacity as a planet to continue feeding the world a rich diet, do we? To that conundrum we turn to next. Astonishing, really, that we can feed the masses to the extent we do today. But how did it start? As fellow members of the human species, we each understand the power of incentive. This can be at the very personal level, the desire to feed your family. At a macro level, though, there needs to be a different kind of incentive. If 10,000-year-old humans are like us, we are poor at large-scale kindness beyond our clan. So again, what was the incentive? Farming is a fact. The species engaged in it across all areas of Earth at roughly the same time. Sure, the climate stabilised after an ice age. It returned 4 seasons with predictable rain, sunshine and fertile soil. But that falls into the category of necessary ingredients, not incentive. We turn, of course, to innovation. But first, imminent starvation of the planet was the fear at the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s. At the time, some imagined the world as it was. They predicted a global famine on an unprecedented scale. This problem was largely solved by 2 key events. The first was the omnipresence of the combustion engine. For every farm used for food, another farm was needed to feed the animals working it, such as horses. At the start of the 20th century, the horse trade was booming. By 1920, you couldn't give away a horse. The amount of land available for farming increased exponentially. Next, enter this guy, Borlaug. He is responsible for Mexican dwarf wheats. The headline? 3 times as much wheat, resulting in yields 6 times higher in Mexico. There were issues, but eventually India and Pakistan adopted the variety. They are 2 of the biggest global players. And just like that, the species yet again innovates its way out of imminent extinction. A pattern is emerging here. Have you ever wondered how many loaves of bread a modern combine harvester driven by one man can produce in a single day? The concentration of populations in cities is commonplace these days. The answer to the question is 500,000 loaves. This shows how that is possible. A population not focused on survival can pursue other goals. They can try to get very rich. In the ancient world, cities were still a reality. Why are cities significant? They are the hotbeds of trade and commerce, the hive of markets, the ground zero of wealth creation. It is as true of the alphabet inventing Phoenicians as it is of the mighty Romans. It's also true that when markets become large and monopolise, they stagnate and fail. This can happen due to business or government control, or both. This is true of the ancient Egyptians and the Soviet Union. It could also be happening in modern entities like the European Union. It is almost certainly true of many corporate environments. Have you ever heard of the term rent-seeking? It describes the activities of those who do not invent or innovate. They simply run businesses that extract money from people. Examples include loans, subsidies, grants, social securities, tariffs, licensing requirements. Once successful businesses are absorbed into the state, it becomes the ultimate rent seeker. This creates a top-down economy. The Soviet Union thought it could fix its economy through price controls and resource micromanagement. Then, one day, it blew up. Commerce works best in a fragmented system. It can then quickly respond to market demand and innovate. A common misconception is that natural markets need micromanagement. This micromanagement takes the form of bureaucratic rules and regulations that stifle markets. One of the best predictors of a company or country's blow-up is size and longevity. This is true of Rome, when in the days of peak empire, tax collectors were said to outnumber taxpayers. Humanity's story is a familiar one. A good thing starts like a new market, corporate or government agencies latch onto it, they regulate it too much, either via administrators or tax collectors, they stifle it until it blows up, and then the cycle simply starts again. Innovation is fundamental to human progress. We have thousands of years of civilizations. They show us how to best nurture and how to extinguish innovation. It is best nurtured when left alone by the bureaucrats, with minimal interference from government. Every example of a good thing turning bad in this domain is caused by breaking the golden rule of innovation. Keep the unimaginative bureaucratic red tape away. An exciting development in this area is AI. The demand for cooks spoiling the broth will be non-existent. Have you ever considered the greatest conundrum in human repopulation? We are so often told that we are overpopulated and that it's out of control. But what if I told you that common sense assumption is inaccurate? Rather, there is a problem of sorts. It's just the complete opposite of what you believed it was. In the 1970s, India tried to curb its population. It barbarically forced 8 million poor Indians to accept vasectomies. Many believed that rising populations were a danger to humanity. This led to unwanted interventions by governments. In Uttawa village, police surrounded it and sterilised every male. This was a justified measure against people pollution, one government official exclaimed. At the time, India's birth rate was already falling from 5.9 children per woman to 2.6 per woman. Pakistan's had already halved to 3.2 children per woman. Bangladesh has fallen from 6.8 children per woman to 2.7. Throughout the world, there is no country that has a higher birth rate than it did in 1960. And herein lies the conundrum. India was wasting its time with barbaric measures. Its birth rates were already declining. They would continue to do so even after the government that forced sterilisation was booted out. It is a fact. When humans create free markets, they thrive. If they provide a good standard of living, the population stabilizes. The question now is, does fewer babies per woman risk the opposite problem to overpopulation? It could lead to population collapse. Simply put, population collapse is where the aged population overburden the working population with health and social costs to the point of unsustainability. In the past, this was plugged by the work of slaves. And what of that shameful, omnipresent legacy that is slavery? In my home country, Britain, a shift occurred. It changed the world forever. We went from a mostly farming economy to an industrial one. Humanity's story up to the abolition of slavery is largely one of self-sufficiency. People produced enough to feed their families and had a surplus to sell to landowners. Life was hard. If landowners were to generate any more, they'd need to use the labour of men and women that needed a small amount of food and no families to feed. A wage was unthinkable. This was the demand for slavery in a nutshell. The import of stolen African men to work for free was considered innovative at the time. That is until Great Britain discovered a new way to generate limitless power of 1 billion slaves. I will describe it using only one word. That word is coal. Coal gave the Industrial Revolution its surprising second wind. It kept the mills, forges and locomotives running. It fueled the second industrial revolution of the 1860s. This era, powered by electricity, chemicals and telegraphs, brought Europe to great wealth and global power. Coal gave Britain fuel equal to 15 million extra acres of forest, almost Scotland's size. By 1870, coal burning in Britain was generating as many calories as 850 million labourers would have used. It was as if each worker had 20 servants at his beck and call. The country's steam engine could replace 6 million horses or 40 million men. Those men would have eaten 3 times the entire wheat harvest. That is how much energy had been harnessed to the application of the division of labour. That is how impossible the task of Britain's 19th century miracle would have been without fossil fuels. Fast forward to the modern world. Electricity's contribution to human welfare can hardly be exaggerated. Suppose you were told my hypothetical family of 1800 eating their gristly stew in front of a log fire that in 2 centuries their descendants would not need to fetch logs or water or carry out sewage. Water, gas and a magical invisible power called electricity would come to their home through pipes and wires. They would jump at the chance to have such a home, but they would wearily ask how they could possibly afford it. Suppose you then told them that to earn such a home, both parents must work 8 hours in an office, travelling about 40 minutes each way in a car. The children need not to work, but must go to school to get jobs when they turn 20. They would be more than dumbfounded. They would be delirious with excitement. Where, they would cry, is the catch? Today, the average person consumes power at about 2,500 watts. That's 600 calories per second. About 85% of that comes from burning coal, oil, gas, the rest from nuclear and hydro. A fit person on an exercise bike can generate about 50 watts, so it would take 600 slaves working 8-hour shifts to pedal you to your current lifestyle. Next time you lament are dependent on fossil fuels, pause. For every family of 4 you see, there should be 600 unpaid slaves at home living in poverty. If they had a better lifestyle, they'd need their own slaves. That's close to 1 trillion people. You can take this reductio ad absurdum in 2 ways. You can regret the sinful profligacy of the modern world, that is the usual reaction, or you can conclude that without fossil fuels, 90% of people would have to live in slavery for the rest to have a decent standard of living. That was the case in the Bronze Age empires. A trigger warning for the climate activists. You have been lied to. You have been swindled. Consider one of the greatest cons of the modern era. Biofuel. If America grew all its own transport fuel as biofuel, it would need 30% more farmland than it now uses to grow food. Where would it grow the food then? To grasp the impact of renewable energy, consider this. To supply the current 300 million or so Americans with their power demand of 10,000 watts each, 2,400 calories per second, we would need solar panels the size of Spain, wind farms the size of Kazakhstan, woodlands the size of India or Pakistan, or hayfields for horses the size of Russia and Canada combined. Thomas Edison deserves the last word. I am ashamed at the number of things around my house and shops that are done by human beings and ought to be done by a motor without any sense of fatigue or pain. Hereafter, a motor must do all the chores. "2,000 years ago, in the Roman Empire, a nameless man was granted audience with Emperor Tiberius. The purpose of the meeting? The man had invented something astonishing. The invention was a flexible, unbreakable glass. After Tiberius examined the glass cup, he returned it to the glassmaker. The glassmaker then threw it on the ground with all his might. The emperor was shocked at what happened, but the man calmly picked up the cup from the ground. It was only dented. The glassmaker then took a hammer to beat the glass, and in no time the cup regained its original shape. The Roman glassmaker was confident he had impressed the emperor. Now he was waiting for a reward for his clever creation. When the emperor asked if anybody else could make this flexible glass, the craftsman replied no. Instead of a reward, the glassmaker was executed. Thus, his secret of making flexible glass died with him. The reason for this: such an invention would have been an existential threat to the gold and other metal trades. The invention died with the inventor, never to be seen again. It is often underestimated by historians just how problematic the lack of invention and innovation became in Rome. It was a formidable empire with impressive technology, but it relied heavily on slaves and couldn't share ideas, so it stagnated. This, along with many other factors, led to what we all now know as its decline and fall. Today, we have a similar threat to innovation. In the past 2 centuries, we have created modern societies in northwestern Europe. They have encouraged the spread of innovative ideas, both culturally and technologically. For example, railways, roads, telephones, and the internet, as well as free markets, have been the catalyst of explosive progress. They let entrepreneurs succeed and fail. But it seems that today's murderous emperors are the corporate bureaucrats. Who are these people? The pharmaceutical companies that rig the treatments they offer as mere extortion rackets. And there's the endless bureaucracy of government bodies. They have costly, inefficient programs to implement. The truth is, innovation is limitless. Like wild forest fires, it appears in different areas of the world at different times. It cannot be predictably tracked, but it is predictable. Once successful, the rent seekers will land to suck as much money as possible until they can suck no more. Fear not though, for innovation is, as I said, limitless. But if innovation is limitless, why is everybody so pessimistic about the future? wondered why the Nazis made terrible scientists? In the 90s and early 2000s, I was a schoolboy. At the time, two in vogue future events would irreparably damage the world. They were the depletion of oil reserves and greenhouse gases. They would cause the polar ice caps to melt, raising sea levels. Had I been at school in the 80s, it would have been the perils of acid rain, the 60s population explosion and global famine. Lurching from sensationalist catastrophe to sensationalist catastrophe is not new. News channels do it all day, every day. Nobel Peace Prizes are awarded to the most melodramatic. Yet, here we all are. Bestseller after bestseller presents us with a different flavour of catastrophe. With the advent of social media, the sensationalism generated is like a fire doused in petrol. Men and women in white coats waxing science have been turbocharged in recent years. Following the science became the slogan of politicians everywhere. We have given unprecedented power to those promoting scientism. It is the act of promoting an idea with a supposed scientific basis rather than true science. There is no authority in science. That is why the Nazis made terrible scientists. Recent years have seen mandated lockdowns, mandated mask wearing, even mandated vaccinations. To question was to display treason. That is not science. Again and again, we have been scared by the news, politicians, and so-called scientists. They all collaborated to stay on message. There is always a group eager to terrify us. They warn of doom from acid rain, global food shortages, and too much economic growth. But we defy them all. Sadly, we never hold them to account, although perhaps that is changing. In the 19th century, large parts of Africa were colonised. This lasted long into the 20th century, when freedoms were granted by powers such as Britain, Germany, France and Italy. Since then, African governments have drained the countries of resources. They have buried potential business under extreme bureaucracy. Despite windfalls in high-value minerals like diamonds and oil, and aid from rich countries, it has stagnated and stymied. It is because of aid and windfalls that governments have been able to continue behaving in a corrupt way. Africa could boom economically, but aid givers and corrupt governments are doing more harm than good. They should step aside. There is hope, however. Like anything that happens organically, this is a bottom-up process. Cheaper mobile phones let enterprising Africans do business without corrupt governments snooping. This is already happening on the ground. But what about climate? In the 1970s, the climate scare was global cooling. Today, we all know the opposite. In fact, to illustrate the point, here are two articles 40 years apart demonstrating the point I am making. Can you guess which one is about cooling and which one is about warming? The weather is always capricious, but last year gave new meaning to the term. Floods, hurricanes, droughts. The only plague missing was frogs. The pattern of extremes fit scientists' forecast of what a blank world would be like. Meteorologists disagree about the cause and extent of the blank trend, as well as over its specific impact on local weather conditions, but they are almost unanimous in the view that the trend will reduce agricultural productivity for the rest of the century. The longer the planners delay, the more difficult they will find it to cope with climatic change once the results become grim reality. The point I am making is not that one prediction proved wrong, but that the glass was half empty in both cases. Both cooling and warming were predicted to be disastrous, so only the existing temperature is perfect. But climate has always varied. It's narcissistic to think that the recent climate is perfect. The answer, by the way, is that the first one was a recent warning about warming. The second, an old warning about cooling. Both were from the same newspaper. Remember, I am not here attempting to resolve the climate debate, nor saying that catastrophe is impossible. I am testing my optimism against the facts. They show a small chance of rapid severe climate change. Also, there is a small chance of net harm from the most likely climate change. The chance of no adaptation is small. Finally, the chance of no new low carbon energy technologies is small. Multiply those small probabilities together and the probability of a prosperous 21st century is therefore by definition large. And there is every reason to think that Africa can share in that prosperity. Despite war, disease and dictators, its population will, inch by inch, stabilise, its cities will flourish and its exports will grow, and its farms will prosper, its wilderness will survive and its people will know peace. In the Ice Age megadroughts, Africa could support few early hunter-gatherers. In a warm, moist, interglacial, it can support 1 billion, mostly urban specialists. It is hard not to be an optimist in this world when you consider the plight of the human species. After 10,000 years, new cultures, habits and skills were exchanged. This led to a rise in technology, but it was always limited to local groups and clans. That is until 200 years ago when human progress exploded. Our network is now truly global. If I'd been told in my teens that in 20 years I'd be able to create and score videos in my living room and share them globally, I'd have been emotional with hope. It is easy to indulge our tendency to see the glass as half empty. Social media shows our worst instincts. We can't help but watch a car crash or a loud argument while eating popcorn. But if you exclude the virtual world and engage with the physical one, you will see that we are using technology to improve our lives. Catalaxy is a word coined by Friedrich Hayek. It describes a spontaneous order created by exchange and specialization. As we continue, we can be certain of this. Intelligence will become more collective. Innovation and order will be more bottom up. Work will become more specialized and leisure more diversified. Larger corporations, political parties and government bureaucrats will crumble. They will fragment like the central planning agencies before them. The bottom-up world is to be the great theme of this century. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed this video, here is a link to a video I made on the murder of a man that dared to translate biblical texts to English for the first time. His company was sought by the likes of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII and many others before being brutally executed.